The morning mist clung to the ancient oak trees of Willowbrook Estate like whispered secrets. Princess Catherine Alexandra walked slowly along the familiar gravel path, her pale blue coat catching the first rays of sunlight that filtered through the canopy above. Behind her, at a respectful distance, Prince Edward matched her measured pace. They had walked this same route countless times over the past 15 years, but today felt different. Today carried the weight of finality. Catherine paused beside the old stone fountain that had been her favorite spot since childhood. The water trickled gently from the carved swan's beak, creating ripples that caught the light like scattered diamonds. She remembered the first time Edward had brought her here, nervous and stumbling over his words as he tried to impress the commoner who had somehow captured the heart of the future king. She had been working as a museum curator then, passionate about preserving history, never dreaming she would become part of it herself. "Do you remember what you said to me right here?" Catherine asked softly, her voice barely audible above the fountain's gentle song. Edward stepped closer, his weathered hands clasped behind his back in that familiar royal posture that had become second nature over the decades. "I told you that this fountain had been built by my great-grandfather for my great-grandmother," he replied, his deep voice carrying the slight tremor that had developed in recent months. "And I said that one day I hoped to build something equally beautiful for the woman I would love." Catherine smiled, though tears threatened at the corners of her eyes. "You were so earnest. I thought you were just showing off." She traced her finger along the fountain's worn edge. "I never imagined that what you built for me would be an entire life together." The estate grounds stretched endlessly before them, manicured lawns giving way to wild meadows where deer often grazed in the early morning hours. This had been their sanctuary, the one place where they could simply be Edward and Catherine instead of their royal highnesses. Here among the roses that Catherine had planted with her own hands and the vegetable garden, where Edward still insisted on growing tomatoes despite the head gardener's protests, they had raised their 3 children. Here they had weathered storms both personal and public. As they continued their walk, Catherine's mind drifted to the letter that lay sealed on Edward's desk back at the palace. The letter that would change everything. 3 months ago, the doctors had delivered news that no amount of royal protocol could soften. The treatments had run their course. Time had become precious in a way that even crowns and centuries of royal lineage could not extend. "The children will be here this afternoon," Edward said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "All 3 of them, with the grandchildren too. The house will be full again." Catherine nodded, picturing her eldest son James, so serious and dutiful, already carrying the invisible weight of future kingship on his shoulders. Then there was Margaret, fierce and independent, who had shocked the establishment by becoming a doctor and working in refugee camps. And little Thomas, though at 28 he was hardly little anymore. The artist of the family who saw beauty in everything and had inherited his mother's gentle heart. "They're good children," Catherine murmured. "Strong. They'll be fine. Because of you," Edward said firmly. "They learned compassion from you, kindness, how to see people as people, not subjects." They reached the old wooden bench beneath the willow tree where Edward had proposed 35 years ago. It seemed fitting to rest here now, watching the morning sun climb higher above the estate that had been witness to so much of their story. Catherine settled onto the bench with the careful movements that had become necessary recently, and Edward sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "I've been thinking about that young curator who was so determined to preserve the past," he said, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "She never could have imagined that she would become the past that future generations would want to preserve." Catherine laughed softly. "I was terrified of you at first. Not because you were a prince, but because you made me feel things I hadn't expected to feel. You made me brave. You made me human," Edward replied. "Before you, I was just playing a role. You showed me how to live inside it." A robin landed on the grass before them, pecking at the earth with determined little hops. Catherine watched it with the same fascination she had always shown for small, beautiful things. Even now, especially now, she found wonder in ordinary moments. The way morning light painted everything gold, the sound of Edward's breathing beside her, the familiar weight of the simple gold band on her finger that had become more precious to her than any of the crown jewels. "Promise me something," she said suddenly, turning to face him. "When people tell our story years from now, I want them to remember that it was real. Not a fairy tale. Real people who loved each other through real problems and real joy." Edward lifted their joined hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. They'll remember a woman who changed a monarchy by simply being herself, who showed that royalty isn't about being above people, but about being among them. As they sat in the growing warmth of the morning sun, Catherine closed her eyes and listened to all the sounds of home, birds calling to each other across the grounds, the distant sound of staff preparing for their family's arrival, the steady, reassuring rhythm of Edward's heartbeat. This was what she wanted to hold on to, not the pomp and ceremony, not the public appearances or state dinners, but this quiet peace beside the man who had loved her exactly as she was from the very beginning. The walk back to the house would come soon enough. There would be doctor's visits to endure, difficult conversations with the children, and the careful choreography of public appearances that must continue until the very end. But for now there was just this moment, suspended in morning light like a prayer answered. The afternoon brought with it a symphony of familiar chaos as 3 generations of the royal family descended upon Willowbrook Estate. Car doors slammed in the circular drive, children's laughter echoed through the halls, and the usually pristine drawing room was soon scattered with toys, books, and the comfortable debris of family life. Catherine sat in her favorite armchair by the window, watching her 7-year-old granddaughter, Emma, chase her younger brother Oliver around the ancient Persian rug, while their parents tried unsuccessfully to maintain some semblance of royal decorum. "Granny Catherine, Oliver took my horse," Emma declared, her small face flushed with indignation as she clutched a wooden toy to her chest. Catherine smiled and patted her knee, inviting the little girl closer. "Perhaps Oliver would like to hear the story about this horse," Catherine suggested gently. "It belonged to your grandfather when he was about your age." Oliver stopped his escape attempt and turned curious eyes toward his grandmother. At 5 years old, he was just beginning to understand that his grandparents were somehow different from other grandparents, though he wasn't quite sure why people always bowed when they met them. Catherine had worked hard to make sure her grandchildren knew they were loved simply for being themselves, not for the titles they carried. "Tell us, Granny." Oliver clambered onto the chair beside her, and soon Emma had joined them, the dispute over the toy horse forgotten in favor of a story. "Your grandfather was very lonely as a little boy," Catherine began, her voice taking on the gentle cadence she had perfected during years of bedtime stories with her own children. "He lived in a big palace with lots of adults who were always very serious and formal. But he had this wooden horse that had belonged to his own father, and he would pretend it could take him on adventures to places where he could just be a regular little boy." Edward appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a soft smile as he watched his wife weave stories for their grandchildren. Even after all these years, he was struck by Catherine's natural ability to make everyone around her feel special and heard. She had transformed not just him, but their entire family, showing them how to balance duty with genuine human connection. "What kind of adventures, Granny Catherine?" Emma asked, snuggling closer. "Well," Catherine continued, "he would ride his horse through enchanted forests where the trees could talk and told him jokes that made him laugh until his sides hurt. He would visit villages where everyone knew his name but didn't care about crowns or protocols. They just wanted to share their stories with him." Margaret appeared from the hallway where she had been having a quiet conversation on her phone with the hospital where she worked. Even on family visits, she couldn't completely disconnect from her patients. She settled onto the sofa across from her mother, her expression a mixture of professional composure and barely contained emotion. "The refugee camp in Jordan is expanding again," Margaret said quietly to her father. "They need more medical supplies. I was hoping we could make another donation through the foundation." Edward nodded. "Of course. Draft whatever you need." He had learned long ago that Margaret's work wasn't just a career choice but a calling that burned bright within her. Catherine had encouraged their daughter's independence even when it meant breaking with royal tradition, understanding that true strength came from following one's convictions. James arrived last, as always, apologizing for being delayed by a meeting with Parliament about proposed changes to some archaic ceremonial procedures. At 42, he carried himself with the careful dignity of someone who had been raised knowing that someday the weight of a crown would rest on his head. But here, in his parents' presence, some of that formality melted away. "Mother," he said, kissing Catherine's cheek gently. "You look tired. Are you sleeping well?" Catherine reached up to touch his face, noting the lines of concern that had appeared around his eyes in recent months. "I sleep as well as anyone can when there's so much to think about," she replied honestly. James had always appreciated her directness, even when the truth was difficult to hear. Thomas burst through the French doors that led from the garden, his clothes paint-stained and his dark hair tousled from the wind. In his arms he carried a canvas that he had obviously been working on outside in the natural light. "I've been painting the view from the rose garden," he announced, setting the canvas on an easel that seemed to have appeared from nowhere. "I wanted to capture how the light falls on the fountain at this time of day." The family gathered around the painting and Catherine felt her breath catch. Thomas had somehow managed to capture not just the visual beauty of their beloved fountain, but something deeper. The way the light seemed to hold memories. The sense that this place had witnessed countless precious moments and would continue to do so, long after they were gone. "It's beautiful, darling," Catherine whispered. "It's for you," Thomas said simply, "so you can always have it with you even when—" He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. The unspoken reality that had brought them all together today hung in the air like morning mist, present but not overwhelming. Dinner was served in the smaller dining room rather than the grand formal space they used for state occasions. Catherine had insisted on this, wanting their last family gathering to feel intimate rather than ceremonial. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from Emma's recent school play, to Margaret's latest research paper, to James's ongoing efforts to modernize certain aspects of royal protocol. "Do you remember?" Catherine said during a lull in the conversation. "When James was about 8 and he declared he didn't want to be king because kings couldn't have pets?" James groaned good-naturedly. "Mother, please, what happened?" Oliver asked, fascinated by the idea of his usually serious uncle as a rebellious child. "Your grandmother," Edward said with a twinkle in his eye, "took him straight to the palace stables and introduced him to every horse, dog, and cat on the grounds. She explained that kings don't have pets. They have companions who help them do their job better. The corgis were your idea." James accused his mother with mock severity. "The corgis," Catherine replied with dignity, "were excellent judges of character. They could tell immediately who was worth trusting and who was just trying to impress us." As the evening wore on, the family gradually dispersed to various corners of the house. Margaret curled up with a medical journal in the library. James reviewed briefings in Edward's study. Thomas disappeared to his temporary studio to continue working on another painting. The younger grandchildren were tucked into beds in rooms that still held traces of their parents' childhoods. Finally, Edward and Catherine found themselves alone in their sitting room, the fire crackling softly in the grate. Catherine was working on a needlepoint pillow cover, one of many craft projects she had taken up since the diagnosis. Keeping her hands busy helped quiet her mind. "They're going to be all right," she said suddenly, not looking up from her work. "When the time comes, they'll take care of each other." Edward set down the book he had been pretending to read. "They learned that from watching us," he said quietly. Catherine finally looked up, meeting his eyes across the room. "We did well, didn't we? With all of it. The children, the duty, the love." "We did perfectly," Edward replied without hesitation. "We built something beautiful together." Outside their window, Willowbrook Estate settled into peaceful evening quiet, holding their family close within its walls like a gentle embrace. 3 weeks had passed since the family gathering at Willowbrook, and autumn had begun to paint the estate in shades of gold and crimson. Catherine spent most of her mornings now in the conservatory, surrounded by the plants she had carefully tended for decades. The glass walls let in streams of soft light that seemed gentler somehow, as if even the sun understood the preciousness of these days. She was repotting her favorite orchid when Margaret appeared in the doorway, still wearing her hospital scrubs beneath a hastily thrown-on coat. Her daughter's face carried that particular expression of controlled concern that came from years of delivering difficult news to families. "The results came back from London," Margaret said without preamble. She had learned long ago that her mother preferred directness to cushioned truths. Catherine set down her gardening tools and wiped her hands carefully on a towel. "And? Dr. Harrison wants to discuss treatment options?" "There's a new therapy they're trialing at the Royal Marsden. It's experimental, but the early results are promising." Margaret's voice held the careful hope of someone who had seen too many medical miracles and too many disappointments. "Success rates?" Catherine asked calmly. Margaret hesitated. 30% show significant improvement. Another 20% see stabilization for 6 to 12 months. Catherine nodded thoughtfully, her fingers absently stroking the orchid's delicate petals. And quality of life during treatment? Challenging, Margaret admitted. The side effects are substantial. Weakness, nausea, cognitive effects. You would need to be in London for most of the treatment period. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, surrounded by the gentle humidity and earthy smells of the conservatory. Catherine had always done her best thinking here, among the living things that required patience and gentle care to flourish. What would you do? Catherine asked finally. If it were you? Margaret sat down heavily in the wicker chair beside her mother's potting bench. I don't know, she said honestly. The doctor in me wants to fight, to try everything, but the daughter in me... She paused, struggling with emotions that her medical training hadn't prepared her to handle. The daughter in me wants you to be comfortable, to be yourself, to be here, in the places you love, with the people who love you. Catherine reached over and took her daughter's hand. Margaret's fingers were cool from the autumn air but steady as always. You've spent your whole career helping people make impossible decisions, Catherine said gently. What do you tell them? I tell them that there's no right answer. Only the answer that feels true to who they are and what they value most. That afternoon, Edward found Catherine in their private study, surrounded by photo albums and journals. She'd been quietly working on something for weeks now, disappearing for hours at a time with a secretive smile that reminded him of when she used to plan surprise birthday parties for the children. What are you working on? He asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. Catherine looked up, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose in a way that made her look like the scholar she had been before royal life claimed her. Letters, she said simply. For the grandchildren, for when they're older, for James when he becomes king, for Margaret when she needs reminding of how proud I am of her work, for Thomas when he doubts his art. Edward felt his throat tighten. And for me? You don't need a letter, Catherine said with a soft smile. You'll have everything else. The memories, the stories, the way the house will still hold all our conversations in its walls. You'll have our children, who are the best parts of both of us. She closed the album she had been reviewing and leaned back in her chair. I've been thinking about Dr. Harrison's treatment, she said quietly. Edward waited, knowing better than to rush her when she was processing something important. I keep coming back to something you said to me years ago, when we were first married and I was struggling with all the public attention, Catherine continued. You told me that the most important thing wasn't whether people remembered us, but how they remembered us. I remember. I want them to remember that we loved well, that we chose each other every day through everything, that we raised children who knew they were valued for who they were, not just what they would become. Catherine's voice grew stronger as she spoke. I don't want their last memories of me to be of someone fighting a losing battle in a hospital room. I want them to remember this, us talking in our study, surrounded by our life together. Edward was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the gardens where Catherine's roses were preparing for their winter sleep. The treatment could give us more time, he said finally. But what kind of time? Catherine asked gently. Time for more doctor's appointments and treatments that make me too sick to enjoy being with our family? Time spent hoping for a miracle that probably won't come? Or time like this where I can still be myself? Still be present for the people I love? That evening, they called the children together for a conference call. James joined from his office at the palace, Margaret from her flat in London, and Thomas from his studio where he had been working late into the night on a series of paintings he called memory portraits. We've made a decision about the treatment, Edward began. Catherine's hand clasped firmly in his. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with anticipation and dread. I won't be pursuing the experimental therapy, Catherine said clearly. I want to spend whatever time I have left being myself here at home with all of you. Mother, James's voice was carefully controlled. Are you certain? If there's a chance, there's always a chance, darling, Catherine interrupted gently. But I've had a beautiful life, a life I chose. I want to end it the same way, Margaret's professional voice kicked in. What about palliative care? Pain management? I can coordinate with the best specialists. Yes, of course, Catherine agreed. I want to be comfortable. But I want to be here in our home, surrounded by our things and our memories and our love. Thomas, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. How can we help? What do you need from us? Catherine smiled even though her children couldn't see her. This was exactly the question she had hoped one of them would ask. I need you to keep being yourselves. James, keep preparing to be the kind of king who sees people's hearts. Margaret, keep healing the world one patient at a time. Thomas, keep showing people beauty they might otherwise miss. And all of you keep loving each other the way we've taught you to love. And I need you to know, she continued, her voice growing stronger, that everything I am, everything I've learned about love and strength and purpose lives on in you. Death doesn't diminish that. It just means the story continues in different voices. After they ended the call, Edward and Catherine sat together in the gathering darkness of their study. Outside, the first frost of the season was beginning to silver the grass, but inside, surrounded by the warmth of their shared life, they felt only peace. No regrets? Edward asked softly. Catherine leaned against his shoulder. Only that we can't do it all again, she whispered. But then again, maybe that's what makes it so precious. November brought with it an unexpected gift, a stretch of unseasonably warm days that felt like autumn's final generous embrace. Catherine had grown weaker in the weeks since their decision, but her spirits remained remarkably bright. She spent her mornings in bed now, propped up with pillows, watching the morning light dance across the walls of the bedroom she and Edward had shared for over 3 decades. The room had become a hub of quiet activity. Margaret had taken leave from the hospital and moved into the guest room down the hall, her medical expertise now devoted entirely to ensuring her mother's comfort. James visited daily, often bringing state papers to review so he could work nearby while keeping Catherine company. Thomas had set up a small easel by the window, painting quick watercolor sketches of his mother at different moments, reading, dozing in the afternoon sun, laughing at something Edward had whispered in her ear. You're documenting me like a rare flower, Catherine teased him one afternoon, watching him mix colors on his palette. You are a rare flower, Thomas replied seriously, and I want to remember exactly how the light falls on your face when you smile. Catherine's old friend Sarah arrived on a Wednesday, flying in from her home in Scotland, where she had been running a charity for underprivileged children. The two women had met during Catherine's university days, long before royal life had changed everything, and their friendship had weathered decades of separation, protocol, and the inevitable complications that came with befriending a future queen. You look terrible, Sarah announced cheerfully as she settled into the chair beside Catherine's bed. Her familiar bluntness unchanged after 40 years. Thank you, Catherine laughed. I was hoping for radiant or at least peaceful in her decline. Radiant was never your look anyway. You were always more quietly luminous, Sarah replied, unpacking a thermos from her bag. I brought tea from that little shop in Edinburgh you love. The one with the impossible-to-pronounce name. They spent the afternoon reminiscing about their university days, when Catherine had been just another history student with dreams of working in museums, and Sarah had been studying literature with plans to become a teacher. Neither of them had imagined then that their lives would take such dramatically different paths, yet their friendship had remained one of the constants in Catherine's life. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't met Edward? Sarah asked as the afternoon light began to fade. Catherine considered the question seriously. Sometimes, I think I would have been happy in my own way. Smaller life maybe, but no less meaningful. I might have run a small museum somewhere, written books about medieval manuscripts, had a cottage garden and a cat named something ridiculous like Sir Whiskers. You would have been brilliant at that life too, Sarah said softly. But I wouldn't have had my children, or learned how to love the way Edward taught me to love, or discovered that I could be strong in ways I never imagined. Catherine's voice grew thoughtful. I think maybe we get the life we're meant to have, even if we can't see the pattern while we're living it. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, Mrs. Henderson. The housekeeper, who had worked at Willowbrook for nearly 50 years, knocked softly on the bedroom door carrying a silver tray with tea, and what appeared to be a thick, leather-bound book. Your Highness, she said formally, though her eyes were bright with affection, the staff wanted you to have this. The book, Catherine discovered, was a collection of photographs and handwritten notes from every member of the household staff, past and present. Gardeners had contributed pictures of flowers Catherine had planted. Kitchen staff had included recipes she had requested for family gatherings. Even the security team had written brief notes about moments when Catherine's kindness had meant something to them. 23 years I've been head gardener here, one note read, and not once has Her Highness walked past the greenhouse without asking about my wife's arthritis and remembering the names of my grandchildren. She always said please and thank you, wrote a former housemaid. Even for things that were just my job. She made me feel like I mattered. Catherine turned through the pages with tears streaming down her face, seeing herself reflected in the eyes of people who had watched her daily life unfold behind the scenes. These were the witnesses to her ordinary moments, the times when no cameras were watching and no official record was being kept. I had no idea they were putting this together, Edward said, looking over her shoulder at the photographs and notes. They love you, Mrs. Henderson said simply, not because you're royal, but because of who you are when nobody's watching. That afternoon, Catherine asked to be helped to the conservatory one last time. The autumn air was crisp but not yet bitter, and she wanted to say goodbye to her plants. Edward and Thomas supported her as she moved slowly among the green spaces she had created, touching leaves and breathing in the familiar earthy scents. The orchids will need special attention through the winter, she told Mrs. Henderson, who had volunteered to take over the plant care, and the jasmine gets temperamental if it's too cold. Talk to it likes that. Talk to it? Mrs. Henderson looked skeptical. Plants are like people, Catherine explained with a gentle smile. They respond to attention and kindness. Tell it about your day, share your worries. It doesn't have to make sense to anyone else. They made their way slowly back to the house as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Catherine paused at the threshold, turning to look back at the gardens one last time. The roses had been cut back for winter, the fountain was still, and the old oak trees stood bare against the evening sky. But she could see it all as it had been during the spring and summer months, vibrant, alive, full of the beauty that had sustained her through everything. It's been a good life, she said quietly, more to herself than to the others. The best life, Edward agreed, his arm around her waist providing steady support. That night, as Catherine settled back into bed, she felt a profound sense of completion. Not the bitter satisfaction of checking items off a list, but the deep contentment that comes from having lived fully and loved well. The experimental treatment in London felt like something from another world now, a path that had never truly been hers to walk. Outside her window, the first stars were appearing in the clear November sky. Catherine had always found comfort in the stars. They had witnessed countless human stories, countless beginnings and endings, and they would continue their ancient dance long after her own story had become part of history. Edward, she whispered into the darkness beside her. I'm here, he replied immediately. Promise me you'll keep the conservatory going, and the rose garden. I want there to always be something growing here, something beautiful for the grandchildren to remember. I promise, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And promise me you'll let James know it's all right to change things, to make the monarchy his own. The traditions we keep should serve love, not the other way around. I will. Catherine closed her eyes, feeling the weight of Edward's promise settling over her like a warm blanket. Tomorrow there would be more visitors, more conversations, more precious moments to gather like flowers before winter came. But tonight there was just this peaceful darkness, the sound of Edward's breathing beside her, and the certainty that every choice had led her exactly where she was meant to be. December arrived with an unexpected snowfall that transformed Willowbrook Estate into something from a fairy tale. Catherine watched from her bedroom window as fat snowflakes drifted past, collecting on the bare branches of the oak trees and turning the familiar landscape into something magical and new. She had always loved the first snow of winter, the way it made even ordinary things beautiful. Her strength had diminished considerably in the past weeks, and she rarely left the bedroom now except for special occasions. But her mind remained sharp, and she found herself appreciating small details with an intensity that surprised her. The way morning light caught in Edward's silver hair as he read the newspaper aloud to her. The sound of Margaret's quiet conversation with the nurses downstairs. The smell of Thomas's oil paints when he worked on his paintings nearby. The children want to bring Emma and Oliver for a visit, James said during one of his afternoon stops. He had taken to timing his visits around the children's school schedules, wanting to maximize every moment while still maintaining some normalcy for the youngest members of the family. Of course, Catherine said immediately, but prepare them a little. I look quite different now. James nodded, understanding. Catherine had lost weight, and the treatments for pain management had changed her appearance. But her eyes still held the same warmth and intelligence that had captivated his father all those years ago. When the grandchildren arrived the next day, they approached their grandmother's bed with the careful uncertainty of children, who sense something important is happening, but don't quite understand what. Emma, now 8, seemed to grasp more than her younger brother about the gravity of the situation. "Granny Catherine, are you very sick?" she asked with the directness that Catherine had always encouraged in her grandchildren. "Yes, darling, I am," Catherine replied honestly. "My body is very tired and it's not going to get better." Oliver, at 6, climbed carefully onto the bed beside her. "Does it hurt?" he asked, his small face serious with concern. "Sometimes," Catherine admitted, "but I have very good doctors who help with that. And having you here makes me feel much better." "Mummy says you're going to heaven," Emma said, settling on the other side of the bed. "Will you be able to see us from there?" Catherine smiled, pulling both children closer. "I don't know exactly what happens after we die," she said gently. "But I know that love doesn't disappear. Every time you do something kind or brave or beautiful, a little bit of all the people who loved you is right there with you. So even if I can't see you with my eyes, I'll be part of everything good you do." They spent the afternoon looking through photo albums together, Catherine telling stories about the pictures while the children asked endless questions. There was the photo from James's christening, where baby James was crying so loudly that the Archbishop looked startled. The picture from Margaret's medical school graduation, where she stood proud and determined in her cap and gown. Thomas's first art exhibition, where he looked simultaneously terrified and thrilled. "Tell us about when you met Grandpa Edward," Oliver requested, snuggling against Catherine's side. So Catherine told them the story she had told their parents many times but adapted for young ears. How she had been working in a museum, carefully cleaning old manuscripts and artifacts when a handsome prince came to visit. How he had been trying so hard to impress her that he had accidentally knocked over a display case. How she had helped him clean up the mess and they had spent the afternoon talking about history and dreams and all the things they hoped to do with their lives. "And then you fell in love?" Emma asked, her romantic 8-year-old heart enchanted by the story. "Then we became friends first," Catherine corrected gently. "Love is wonderful, but friendship is what makes it last. Your grandfather is still my very best friend." Even now, Edward appeared in the doorway, carrying a tea tray and wearing the slightly overwhelmed expression he always got when dealing with the practical aspects of childcare. "I thought you might want some hot chocolate," he said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "Grandpa Edward, tell us about the horse fountain," Oliver demanded. Apparently having connected this request to some earlier conversation, Edward settled into the chair beside the bed, beginning the familiar story while Catherine closed her eyes and let the sound of his voice wash over her. This was what she wanted to remember, not the formal ceremonies or public appearances, but these quiet family moments where love was shared as naturally as breathing. That evening, after the children had been tucked into bed in the guest rooms, Catherine asked for some time alone with each of her children. James came first, sitting stiffly in his usual chair until Catherine patted the bed beside her. "Sit here," she said. "Please, I want to talk to you about being king." James moved to the edge of the bed, his expression serious. "Mother, you don't need to." "Yes, I do," Catherine interrupted gently. "Being king isn't about wearing a crown or living in a palace. It's about service. About remembering that your job is to make life better for the people you serve, not to make them serve you." She took his hand, noting how much it resembled Edward's. Strong, capable, gentle when needed. "You're going to want to change things to make the monarchy more relevant for modern times. Do it. Don't let tradition become a prison. The crown should serve the people, not the other way around." James nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I'm not sure I'm ready." "None of us are ever ready for the big moments," Catherine said softly. "But you have something your father and I never had when we started. You've seen what a loving marriage looks like. You've seen how to balance duty with humanity. You know that being royal doesn't mean being perfect. It means being real." When Margaret came in, she brought her medical bag, checking Catherine's pulse and adjusting pillows with professional efficiency before settling into personal conversation. "I've been thinking about taking a sabbatical," Margaret said quietly. After everything settles. Maybe working with Doctors Without Borders for a year or two." That sounds perfect for you, Catherine replied. But remember, healing people isn't just your job. It's who you are. Don't let grief make you forget that the world needs your particular gifts. Margaret's composure finally cracked. I don't know how to do this without you. You've always been my compass. Catherine reached for her daughter's hand. Darling, you've been navigating on your own for years. I just cheered from the sidelines. You don't need me to tell you right from wrong. You carry that inside you now. Thomas was the last to visit, bringing with him a canvas that he set carefully on the easel by the window. It was a painting of the whole family gathered around the dinner table at Willowbrook. But somehow he had captured more than just their faces. He had painted the love between them, the way they leaned toward each other, the invisible threads that connected them across the table. It's magnificent, Catherine breathed. You've painted our hearts. I wanted to show how we look when we're just being ourselves, Thomas said, his voice rough with unshed tears. No formal portraits or official photographs. Just us loving each other. Promise me you'll keep painting, Catherine said urgently. The world needs people who can show them beauty they might otherwise miss. Don't let anyone convince you that art isn't important. It's essential. The snow continued to fall throughout the week, creating a hushed, peaceful atmosphere around the estate. Catherine found herself sleeping more during the days, but the evenings remained precious times of connection with her family. Edward hardly left her side now, reading to her from books they had shared throughout their marriage, playing soft music, or simply sitting quietly while she dozed. Do you remember, Catherine said one evening as they watched the snow fall past their window, when we used to worry about whether we were doing enough, whether we were making a difference? I remember you worrying about that, Edward replied gently. I always knew you were changing everything just by being yourself. Look at our children, Catherine continued, her voice growing stronger. James will be a king who truly serves his people. Margaret is healing the world one patient at a time. Thomas is showing people beauty and meaning. We did that, Edward. We raised human beings who make the world better just by existing. Edward lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. We did that together, he corrected. Outside, the snow continued its quiet dance, blanketing Willowbrook Estate in pristine white. Inside, surrounded by the warmth of 4 decades of shared love, Catherine felt a deep peace settling over her. The experimental treatments in London belonged to another lifetime, another story. This was her story, this quiet ending surrounded by the people who had made her life extraordinary. I'm ready, she whispered into the peaceful darkness. Though she wasn't entirely sure if she was talking to Edward, to herself, or to whatever came next. I know you are, Edward replied, his voice steady and sure. And when you're ready to let go, it's all right. We'll take care of each other. We'll remember everything. We'll keep the love alive. Catherine closed her eyes, feeling the weight of those promises like a blessing. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, but tonight there was just this perfect peace, this complete love, this sense of a story told well and fully. The morning of December 15th dawned clear and bright, the overnight snow creating a crystalline landscape that sparkled in the early sunlight. Catherine woke to find Edward sitting beside her bed already dressed, holding a steaming cup of tea and watching her with the tender attention that had become his constant vigil. Good morning, my love, he said softly, setting the tea aside to help her sit up against her pillows. It's a beautiful day, Catherine observed, looking out at the snow-covered gardens. Her voice was weaker now, requiring effort, but her eyes remained bright and aware. The family had gathered at Willowbrook for what everyone understood would likely be their final time together, though no one spoke the words aloud. Margaret moved quietly between her mother's room and the kitchen, coordinating with the hospice nurse who had become a gentle, unobtrusive presence in their daily routine. James arrived early with official papers that needed signatures, but also with stories from Parliament that he knew would make Catherine smile. Thomas had positioned himself by the window with his easel, working on what he privately thought of as his most important painting, Catherine surrounded by morning light, Edward's hand in hers, peaceful and present in the moment. He painted quickly, trying to capture not just the scene but the quality of love that filled the room. The Archbishop is here to see you, Margaret said quietly from the doorway around midday. Catherine nodded. She had requested this visit, wanting to discuss arrangements that had been quietly planned for months. Archbishop Morrison was an old family friend who had known Catherine since her engagement to Edward. and he understood that she wanted simplicity rather than grand ceremony. "Your Highness," he said formally as he entered, then immediately softened his tone. "Catherine, how are you feeling today?" "At peace," she replied honestly. "Thank you for coming. I wanted to talk about the service." They spent an hour discussing her wishes for the memorial service that would, eventually be held at Westminster Abbey. Catherine had clear ideas about what she wanted: music that had meaning to her family, readings that spoke of love rather than loss, and a celebration of life rather than a mourning of death. "I want people to leave feeling hopeful," she explained. "I want them to remember that love is stronger than grief, that the best parts of us live on in the people we've touched. It will be exactly as you wish," the Archbishop assured her. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. The current Prime Minister arrived with minimal fanfare, having driven himself to Willowbrook in a simple car rather than the usual official convoy. Catherine had always appreciated his practical approach to governance and his genuine care for the people he served. "Your Highness," he said, taking the chair beside her bed, "the entire nation is thinking of you." "Thank you," Catherine replied, "but I wanted to see you to talk about something else, about Edward and how the transition will work." They spoke quietly about the months ahead, about how Edward would need support as he adjusted to life without his partner of nearly 4 decades. The Prime Minister assured her that whatever assistance was needed would be provided, and that the government would work closely with James to ensure stability during what would inevitably be a difficult period. "He's stronger than people think," Catherine said of her husband, "but he's going to need time to find his way forward." "We understand," the Prime Minister replied. "Take all the time you need." As evening approached, Catherine asked for everyone to gather in her room. Edward sat beside her on the bed, while their 3 children arranged themselves around the room with the grandchildren. The hospice nurse had withdrawn to give them privacy, though she remained nearby. "I want to say some things while I still can," Catherine began, her voice requiring more effort now but still clear. "First, I need you all to know that this has been the most extraordinary life anyone could ask for. Not because of crowns or palaces, but because of all of you." She looked at each of them in turn: Edward, whose love had been her anchor for 40 years; James, serious and dutiful but with a warm heart that would serve him well as king; Margaret, brilliant and compassionate, healing the world with her own hands; Thomas, sensitive and artistic, showing beauty to anyone willing to see. "James, you're going to be a wonderful king because you understand that true strength comes from service, not power. Margaret, you're already changing the world. Don't ever doubt the importance of what you do. Thomas, your art matters because it helps people see the beauty that exists even in difficult times." The grandchildren sat quietly, sensing the importance of the moment even if they didn't fully understand it. Emma held Oliver's hand, both of them watching their grandmother with wide, solemn eyes. "Emma and Oliver," Catherine continued, her voice growing softer, "remember that being royal isn't about titles or ceremonies. It's about using whatever gifts you have to make life better for others. Be kind, be brave, be yourselves." As darkness fell outside, snow began to fall again, creating a gentle, hushed atmosphere around the estate. Catherine asked Edward to read from a book of poetry they had shared throughout their marriage, his familiar voice filling the room with words about love and memory and the eternal nature of human connection. Around midnight, Catherine's breathing became more labored, and Margaret quietly checked her pulse and adjusted her medication for comfort. The family maintained their vigil, taking turns sitting beside her, sharing quiet memories, and simply being present in the sacred space that surrounds the end of a well-lived life. "Edward," Catherine whispered in the early hours of morning, her voice barely audible. "I'm here," he replied immediately, leaning close to hear her words. "It was perfect," she said, her eyes meeting his one last time. "All of it. Perfect." At 4:17 a.m. on December 16th, surrounded by the people who had made her life meaningful, Catherine Alexandra closed her eyes for the final time. Outside, snow continued to fall on Willowbrook Estate, blanketing her beloved gardens in pristine white, while inside, a family began the process of learning how to carry on a love story that death could not diminish. Edward remained beside her for a long time, holding her hand and whispering words of gratitude for the 40 years of happiness she had given him. James, Margaret, and Thomas stood together nearby, supporting each other as they began to understand that while their mother was gone, everything she had taught them about love, duty, and the importance of remaining human in an often inhuman world would live on in them forever. The nation would mourn a beloved queen. The world would remember a woman who had changed a monarchy by simply being herself. But at Willowbrook Estate, surrounded by the roses she had planted and the memories she had created, Catherine's family knew that her greatest legacy was not royal at all. It was the love she had shared so generously, the kindness she had modeled so consistently, and the proof she had provided that even in the most public of lives, the most important moments are often the quietest ones, shared between people who truly know and cherish each other.